Great. Thank you all for having me today. When Brian presented the opportunity for folks in the Leadership Academy to come up and speak at a more intimate forum, I thought it would be a lot of fun and really exciting. And I guess I didn't know that I would go after Gleaves, so that's that's not that cool. He's a tough act to follow. But I think he set me up nicely, actually, for the conversation that I think that we can have today. And when I read the little blurb that preceded this meeting, that was about being a more powerful you, sort of developing your person so that you can lead, perhaps with integrity, so that you can lead with something that you can be proud of. Because if your leadership style reflects who you are, then people see that and people will want to follow you. And it's interesting because we talk about leadership all the time, and I always think, well, am I a leader? Like, is there anything that I do that I could preface as a leader? Is there something I could characterize as leadership? And I think that leadership is actually quite democratic in that everyone leads in their own way. Everyone has. It's not maybe in the traditional sense that we think of leadership. Not everyone's going to be the governor, obviously. Not everyone's going to be someone that's in the legislature. But you have a community. There's some place where you have influence. There is a community that you reside, that you have leadership. And that community can be really large or it can be really small. And I think that the better your leadership skills are, the bigger that community gets. So I guess I'll just talk a little bit about what I think makes my leadership effective, what makes me effective with other people. And then I'd like to get some feedback to see either A, what you think, or B, what you think makes your leadership effective. But there are really sort of three things that I have developed, and I think I'm pretty young. I'm still young, right? There are three things that I've developed that I think really ground me when I walk into a situation or when I have to be someplace where I'm either presenting or I'm exhibiting, I'm showing or representing something. And I know that's really ambiguous, but you lead all the time. When you walk into a room at our Howenstein luncheons, you have to lead with your best foot forward, and you have to present yourself in a way that people, that you can communicate, that people want to follow you, that people want to hear what you have to say, and hopefully eventually that leads to you getting a larger community, like I talked about before. So there are three things: being genuine, surrounding yourself with good people, and making your own opportunities. And I'm 24 now, and it's interesting because a lot of people, even when I was much younger, people would characterize me as an old soul. They'd say that. They'd say, "Oh, I can't believe that you're interested in X, Y, or Z," because it's just not something people your age are really that into. And I think. And this is different for every person, but part of that came from my development. I grew up in a relatively strict evangelical home. My dad's a preacher. My mother was dutiful with her faith, and and they were actually much older. My parents had an age spread of about 12 years. My dad is now 63, and to have a kid, me, this young, apparently is sort of strange. So, he had me when he was, 40, something like that. So, I don't know. I mean, 40 to be 40 and to have a child, but it's funny because by the time I was really of age and I was in adolescence, that sort of thing, I mean, my dad was pushing 50s and he was sort of in his low 50s, and they weren't real active people. So, when I was like, hey, let's go to the football game, or, let's go outside and play catch. I don't think I've ever played catch with my dad a day in my life. Really, and that's really because they had me much later in life, and I had brothers that are much older than I am. And so, the time that other kids were sort of out playing catch, I was in the house. My dad was probably reading the Bible, and I was reading likely some variation thereof. It's funny because I tell this story about the first time that I had experienced Halloween, which is when I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school, and it was because all the other years before that we'd been in church. I had never been outside, like in the world during Halloween. So it was funny because there were theater auditions at school, and there were 2 auditions. There was one in the morning, or not one in the morning. There was one in the afternoon right after school, and there was one in the evening. So there were 2 auditions in the same day, and you had to come to both if you were going to be considered for a part. So this particular Halloween, my parents said, we're not going to church. We don't feel like it. Go to your audition, no big deal. So we went to the audition. I was with some friends. The first audition happened. And it was probably like 6, 7 o'clock at night, something like that. It was starting to get dark, and we were like, well, we're gonna go to our friend's house, grab some food, and then we'll come back to the audition later that evening. Well, I didn't know it was Halloween. It didn't dawn on me. Lots of people dress up for Halloween, but it was not on my purview. And I walked outside, and I was literally terrified. I was so scared because the whole world around me had changed. There were cobwebs from trees, there were ghosts and goblins and all these people that were some form of people that I recognized. There was all this activity in my sleepy little town that I had never seen before, and it was like the whole world was juxtaposed. The whole thing was just totally different than what I had expected. And for a brief moment, I literally thought that I was in the rapture and I had been left behind. I say that and it's funny now, but it was so real for me then. It was a very, very scary time for me, actually, and it was sort of at that point that I knew, that I knew that perhaps my path, or the path that my parents had sort of set for me, or the path that they thought that I would go on, would be the path that I would follow. And you go through an evolution with that. You mature and you figure out sort of what makes you, what makes you genuine. And a lot of the things that I sort of live my life by, on the face, may not be things that my parents would have thought were good things. But actually beneath a lot of those things are rooted in a lot of what they taught me. This old soul thing, I'm always coming back to it, and doing things with integrity, doing things, not out of pride, doing things for some sort of greater good. These are the things that I root myself in. Even though on the face they may look different, the roots are really very much in the place that I come from, and that's something probably within the past year or so that I've come to terms with, because I like to think of myself as very, very different from my parents, but in actuality I'm a lot like them. So being genuine, and I think that being genuine means that you embrace what makes you who you are. It means being vulnerable, because I think people can tell when you're kind of fake. They know that, and I don't think that it's really effective. We talked earlier about what it takes to gain love, to gain trust, and do people see the gestures that you do as contrived? Do they see what you're doing as perhaps you just want to gain influence into my community because you want to take what I have, you want to take some piece of my power. And if you're not genuine, I think that you can tell that really, really early. I'll give you another example with my parents, and something that I now treasure sort of about myself, developing your intuition. And this is something that's so not tangible. It's something that you can only sort of get over time, but you have to pay attention to it when you're young, so that your intuition develops faster than perhaps other people. And I think that that's something that's sort of served me well, is that I think I do a really good job of reading, engaging people, and seeing just how genuine they are when we have a conversation. And so I'll give you an example of one thing that I think my parents had a lot of foresight in, and I still to this day don't really know how they knew this, but I had a friend who I wanted to be friends with. He was kind of a cool kid at school. What were you in junior high, freshman year of high school? He was sort of cool. He was a little avant-garde, and I was like, man, this dude is really fun. Everybody likes him. Whatever. He seems to draw a really popular crowd. And eventually, I was able to, we had class together, and I was like, hey, let's hang out, and we did. And I brought him over one day to hang out, to meet my parents or whatever, and we were going to go run and do something. And my parents met this kid, and I said, okay, well, we're leaving now. And they were like, hold it, whoa, you're not going anywhere. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm not going anywhere? And they're like, no, you're not going anywhere. You know, we're not sure we like this person. And I was like, what do you mean you're not sure you like this person? There's nothing wrong with him. You just met him. You've never seen him a day in your life. We're not sure we like this person. And, you know, so needless to say, the plans were fuddled, and, you know, I didn't go out. So I'm upset. You know, I'm really, really mad. And the only thing my parents could tell me as to why they didn't like this person or why I couldn't hang out with them, they said, verbatim, these are their words, there was something in my spirit that wasn't right. I could sense that there was something that wasn't right about this person. You know, the Lord, they would tell me, the Lord is telling me that you shouldn't be hanging out with them. And I thought, well, that's a load of crap, you know. What do you mean the Lord is telling you that? I mean, you've never met him before. I mean, what if you just have indigestion? Like, how do you know that this person is not genuine? How do you know that this person has some sort of, you know, not carnal, but maybe has something about them that would somehow, you know, influence me to do bad things and make wrong decisions. And they were things that I couldn't see. I mean, because I saw him, I thought he was a cool kid in school. I wanted to emulate him. I wanted to be just like him. And I said, gosh, that's really strange, and that's terrible. And you know, I did develop a friendship with this person. And later, come to find out, he really was kind of crazy. He dated a very close friend of mine, and there were things that happened throughout that relationship where I saw this person doesn't have a lot of integrity. They don't have very good character. They're literally spoiled rotten. Literally spoiled rotten. I'm like, it's not a good person at all. And it wasn't necessarily their fault, but it wasn't something that I could tell until, you know, I'd been through this whole process with this person, gone through, you know, just multiple just giant blow-ups and altercations, and it wasn't until the end where I said, gosh, you know, I think my parents are right. You know, I don't know how they knew it, and I don't know that it necessarily had anything to do with the Lord, but I do think it had something to do with their intuition. Because when you meet someone, you know when they're genuine. I really do, and I wish I had a better way to explain that. I wish I had something that I could give you, some sort of gauge that I could say, when you meet someone, you know, here's sort of the BS meter. You know, they're either like way up here or they're way down here, and it's not something that you can do it's not something that you realize until you start to see it in those first impressions. And that doesn't mean that you should judge every book by its cover. You certainly shouldn't. But when you're genuine, I think that you get past those meters a lot faster. The next thing is surrounding yourself with really good people. This is one that I think takes a lot of emotional maturity. And what I mean when I say emotional maturity, I mean the people that you spend your time with are people that are going to influence you over time. And and I'm naturally an extrovert, and I think, you know, maybe one day we should do the Myers-Briggs test. I mean, ENFP, that may mean nothing to you, but I'm naturally an extrovert, and I get energy from people. You know, being in a crowd is cool, and it's fun for me, and I enjoy it. But I don't necessarily keep a very, you know, sort of wide range of close friends. There are people who are very, very, very close to me, and there are other folks who, you know, maybe sort of are on the peripheral or whatever. And the reason that, and when I was younger, it wasn't like that. When I was younger, I was friends with everybody. I spent all of my time, I would run from one event to the other, all the time. You know, I was never alone because I had so much fun being around people. That's where I got energy from. And eventually I sort of realized that people take energy. They take a lot of energy. And the more time you spend, you know, sort of with people, or the more time you spend with people that don't help you develop, the less time you sort of have with yourself to figure out sort of who you are. So if you don't spend time with people who push you, if you don't spend time with people who challenge you, if you don't spend time with people who ask you to be better than what you currently are, or you spend time with people that don't earn your respect, then you end up, you know, in a lot of ways diminishing your own value. And I know that That's another thing that's perhaps a little intangible, but it's really true, because the core group of folks that are in my life, you know, you'd sort of do anything for. I mean, isn't that what friendship is about? You really would do anything for them. And when someone asks you to do something that is very serious, or someone asks you to do something that you know, or you need help from someone, then that relationship is reciprocal. You know right away if that person is genuine. You know right away if that person is someone that sort of deserves to be in that close circle. And it takes a long time to get in there, but hold those people really, really close to your heart. Hold them really close to your chest, because those are the folks who are, and I know how cliche it sounds, but it's so true. Those are the folks who are really going to help you get to where you want to be, and you can help them get to where they want to be as well. So keep that in mind, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, I find that, you know, having since graduated from college, and there are people that I was really close with, and relationships sort of wax and wane, it's a lesson that I've recently learned is, you know, letting relationships go. Because some people that, you know, you used to be very, very, very good friends with, you just perhaps mature in different ways. And you've got to be okay letting that person, I know some of you are still undergrad, many of you are well beyond that, but in a lot of ways, those relationships, people are going to go off and do things that are independent of you. And if the relationship is strong, you'll still stay connected, but perhaps not as connected as you were. But when you come back, it's like riding a bicycle. And that's really tough to do. I had a very, very good friend who you know, we were literally best friends during undergrad, literally best friends in undergrad. And we both graduated, he went on, we both started our careers, and he all of a sudden, you know, was getting married, and his life was changing really quickly. And for whatever reason, there wasn't time for the rest of us. And I was really, really hurt by that. You know, it's interesting because he literally went and got married and didn't tell anyone, or didn't tell, and maybe that's a reflection on, you know, our relationship. But you know, this whole group of friends that we thought we were so close, you know, we weren't involved in this really, really important part of his life, and that was very, very hurtful. And it was tough because we all wanted to, you know, barge in and say, well, explain yourself. Why would you do this? You know, what does this mean? And, you know, I really had to take a step back and say, if people do what they want to do, and you've got to let them do that. And when you spend energy on relationships that, you know, you perhaps thought were really genuine, when you spend energy on relationships that you thought were really good, you take energy away from the ones that are. So you have to let people do what they want to do, and you have to be okay with relationships waxing and waning, because that energy is energy you should be putting someplace else. So keep that in mind. The next thing is making your own opportunities, which I think is really, really important for being successful. If you're going to make your own opportunities, that means not necessarily being manipulative, but you do create the scenario that you can be successful. You watch people's actions, you sort of, you strategize. I mean, you literally have to come up with a strategy for how you're going to get to where you want to be. And if you don't have that strategy, you just sort of have to let fate do it. While I'm a big believer in fate, I do think that you have to create your own path. You at least have to make the environment, you at least have to create fertile ground for you to be able to do what you want. And you have to figure out what that is. I mean, that's really important. I think a lot of people struggle getting to that point to begin with. You know, what do I want to do? What is important to me? But once you get to that point, figuring out what you want to do, you've got to come up with a strategy for how that works. And I'll give you one example that just sort of, you know, one really tangible example that just sort of matured as of yesterday. The city comptroller retired, I don't know, like a year ago, something like that. And the city comptroller is an elected position. So I think it's every 4 years. You have to be elected in city comptroller. If you don't know what that is, they're the auditor. They're the watchdog. So if something erroneous is happening, if the mayor's using his purchasing card on something that he shouldn't be using it on, it's the comptroller's job to, identify that and make sure it doesn't happen again and take the proper measures to, expose it if need be. So this position, really key position, especially right now in the city when money is really, really tight. This position, this person retired and there was a vacancy. They left the vacancy open for about a year and they said, well, we've got to fill the vacancy so that someone has time to finish that person's term and then they'll have to run for re-election again in 2011. It was funny because people had originally approached me and said, you should really consider running for this position. You should really consider being the city's watchdog. And I said, well, whoa, there's an opportunity, and I thought to myself, it's really interesting. But then I came back and I said, is that really what I want to do? Is that something that is going to be fertile ground for what I eventually want to be? And I said, not so much, at least not right now. I know that opportunity, while, maybe fortuitous, it's not something that I should likely pursue right now. And it just seemed obvious. It seemed like a no-brainer. I'm like, I don't have a background in finance. I can read a ledger, but that's about it. I don't know if I could tell you where there's waste, fraud, and abuse in city government necessarily by looking at a balance sheet. And I said, no, you should probably choose someone who is much more qualified. And people really did push me. They said, no, I think that you could learn, you'll figure it out. And I said, I don't know. It's probably not for me, but it might be for someone else. And at that time, really the impetus for them asking me was that the applicant pool was quite thin. If you had compared me to the other folks who were in the applicant pool at that time, then I probably had a really good chance of winning, honestly. But I said it's not for me. Perhaps the opportunity is for someone else. So I went and I looked at a list of people that I knew well, a list of people that I thought had the credentials, and I said, what, this person I think should throw their name in the hat and see what happens. And there was a very, very, very public forum. Lots of people applied, some very, very notable figures. And they, in the end, the commission ended up turning down all of those folks and choosing the person that I really nudged to go for this position. And it's funny because that person hadn't, in their wildest dreams, thought that they would have even been the city comptroller. If you'd asked them 2 months ago, do you think you'd ever be the city comptroller? Do you think you'd ever have a position that influential? They'd tell you no. They'd tell you absolutely no. And that's an opportunity that I didn't necessarily pursue, but because I could have pursued it myself. I could have, and I may have won. It's possible. But I knew that it wasn't the opportunity that made sense for me at that time. But me being the person that I am, I knew that someone else would likely be much more qualified and do an excellent job. So those are opportunities, and you have to figure out what to do with them. You should always take opportunities, and maybe you don't actually do it yourself, but maybe you pass the opportunity along to someone else. And you have to realize that those opportunities open other opportunities later. So that's just one part of sort of creating the scenario to make you successful. The fact that you can turn away from something and say, not me, but maybe someone else that shows integrity, all that stuff, and people think about that when they consider other things later. So those are the three things that I think are really important as far as developing your leadership. Developing what makes you who you are, and developing how you plan to take your leadership and make it something personal. Because if your leadership isn't personal, I say this a lot, if your heart and your mind aren't in the right place, people see that, and the likelihood that you'll fail is probably quite high. So even if you see someone who's really successful in a really great position, they've got a really good mind, but they hate what they're doing, even if you're making just tons of money, it really doesn't matter, because you're spending a ton of time in something that makes you miserable. And if your heart isn't there, then you're still losing. And vice versa, if your heart is there and it doesn't maybe it's not the right fit for you academically, or perhaps you don't excel at it professionally. You have to know that perhaps this is something that's more of a hobby, something that I can do in a different realm, and not something that, you know, I should choose as my profession. So you should have a profession that does both. So be genuine, surround yourself with good people, and make your own opportunities. That's all. Thank you.